I never thought it would end like this. My daughter, the one I raised with all my heart, dropped me off at a nursing home and walked out of my life. Weeks turned into months, and still, there was no call, no visit, no sign that I mattered. My heart shattered with every passing day. And then, one day, I opened a magazine, and there I was, on the cover, and standing beside me, looking back at me, was my daughter, the one who had abandoned me. How had I ended up here? And why did she leave me when I needed her most? Hi, I'm Diana, and this is my story. I remember the days when life felt full, bustling with meaning. There was a time when my daughter, Lily, and I were inseparable. She was my sunshine, the bright spot in every day. I held her hand, guided her through the world, wiped her tears, and cheered for every small victory. Those moments were my purpose, my reason for waking up each morning. We had our little routines, our inside jokes, our shared glances that spoke louder than words. We were a team, or at least that's how I thought it was. But here I am now, sitting in this sterile room at the nursing home, a place where time feels as if it has frozen. The harsh fluorescent lights flicker above, their buzzing a constant reminder that I am no longer the woman I once was. The air smells faintly of antiseptic, a scent I have come to associate with the slow death of dignity. The other residents shuffle around the hallways, their faces blank, some with vacant eyes, others lost in their own worlds. I see their sadness, their resignation. I'm one of them now, just another forgotten soul, left to fade quietly into the background. I try to shake the thought, but it's hard to ignore. A part of me wants to scream, to shout that I am more than this place, more than these walls that are closing in on me. But then I remember. I remember how I ended up here. I glance at the photograph on my nightstand, the one of Lily and me. She must have been about 5 or 6, smiling up at me with the purest joy I had ever seen. I remember the day it was taken. We were at the park, and I had bought her a balloon. It floated away just moments after I handed it to her, but she wasn't upset. She simply said, "Mum, we'll get another one next time." And we did, every time. But there was no next time, not anymore. The memory of the park, of her small hand in mine, seems so distant now, like it belonged to another life, a life before everything changed. I sigh, resting back against the pillow. I try to remember the last time I saw Lily, the last time she visited. Was it just a few months ago? Or had it been longer than that? It feels like a lifetime. I can't help but wonder what happened. Where did things go wrong? I was a good mother, wasn't I? I did everything I could for her. I worked hard, gave up things I loved to make sure she had everything she needed. I sacrificed my time, my energy, my dreams, all for her. And yet, here I am, abandoned. I still remember the day she told me it was time for me to go to the nursing home. It was a conversation that had been coming for a while, I suppose, but I hadn't been prepared for the finality of it. The coldness in her voice, the lack of hesitation. She told me that her life was too busy, that she couldn't care for me anymore. There was a time, years ago, when I would have fought for her to stay with me. But by then, I was too tired, too worn down by years of caregiving and longing. So I agreed. I let her take me here, to this place. I thought I would find peace. I thought I would find solace in the fact that at least she was living her life, that at least she was happy. But I was wrong. The silence here, the absence of her presence, it cuts deeper than I ever imagined. There are days when I sit by the window, waiting for her to walk through the door, to come and tell me she made a mistake, that she'll take me home again. But it never happens. The door never opens. And now, I sit here, alone with my thoughts, reflecting on everything I've lost. My youth, my energy, my family, And most of all, my connection to the one person I thought would always be there for me. I look around the room once more. The sterile walls, the ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall, and the quiet murmur of other residents in the distance. The world outside seems to move on without me, but in some strange way, it's in these quiet moments that I feel the most alive. It's almost as if I am waiting for something, something unexpected, something that will shake me out of this rut and remind me that I am still a person with a story, with worth. Little did I know, something was about to happen that would turn my life upside down, something I never could have imagined in a million years. I remember the first sign that something was slipping between Lily and me. It was subtle at first, a slow fade, like the colours of an old photograph gradually losing their vibrancy. The first time it happened, I thought I was imagining it. I was busy at the kitchen table, trying to finish a crossword puzzle, while the radio played softly in the background. Lily was in her room, and I could hear her voice muffled through the walls, a distant murmur as she chatted with her friends on the phone. But then, I noticed it. It wasn't just the quiet moments, the ones that came between us with no explanation. It was something deeper. It was the way she began to avoid my eyes, how her answers to my questions became curt and distracted. There was a distance in her voice when she spoke to me, like she was holding something back, like she wasn't quite sure what to say to her mother anymore. I brushed it off at first, convincing myself that it was just a phase. She was in high school, after all, a teenager, dealing with her own world of friends and ambitions. I told myself that this was just a natural part of growing up, that eventually we'd find our way back to each other. But then came the second sign. It was the day I was supposed to pick her up from school. I had been waiting at the gate for what felt like forever, the sun sinking lower in the sky, my heart beginning to race. She was always so punctual, but that day she didn't show. My mind raced with the worst possibilities. Maybe she was in trouble. Maybe something had happened. When she finally arrived, she was with a boy I hadn't seen before. Her smile was bright, but there was something off about it. She didn't seem as eager to run into my arms as she usually did. She barely even glanced at me. Instead, she whispered something to him, and they walked off together, leaving me standing there alone. I was heartbroken, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to intrude on her independence, but deep down, I knew something was changing. The change didn't stop there. It grew, slowly but surely. The phone calls became shorter, less frequent. She didn't seem to need me the way she used to. I would make dinner and wait for her to come home, hoping for just a few minutes of conversation. But often, she'd come in, grab a plate, and retreat to her room without so much as a word. I remember standing in the kitchen one night, stirring the pot on the stove, and listening to the silence that had settled over our house. It felt suffocating, like we were both drowning in it, but unwilling to acknowledge it. I wanted to confront her, to ask her what was wrong, but I feared what I might hear. What if she didn't need me anymore? What if she had outgrown me completely? I couldn't bear that thought. So instead, I stayed silent. I let the distance grow, convinced that this was just a phase she'd eventually outgrow, just like so many phases before. But then came the moment I couldn't ignore. It was a weekend, and I had spent the entire day getting the house ready for a visit from her. I had cleaned every corner, put out fresh flowers in the vase, and even baked her favourite cookies. I thought this would be the day she would come home, sit with me, and catch up on everything. I waited and waited. Hours passed, and still, no call, no text, no knock at the door. Finally, late that evening, Lily showed up. At least, I thought she would. But it wasn't Lily at all. It was a woman from the nursing home where I would eventually end up, a representative who was there to discuss the options for my future care. She handed me a brochure. The words seemed to blur together as I looked down at the pamphlet, my hands shaking. It was too soon, too sudden. I hadn't even seen the signs clearly yet, had I? Was this what she had been planning all along? "I'll call you soon to check in on how you're doing," the woman said, her voice too sweet, too formal. She didn't look me in the eye. She didn't see the confusion in my face, the heartbreak that was beginning to bubble to the surface. I stood there, numb, the brochure crinkling in my hands, my mind racing. It wasn't supposed to be this way. She was supposed to be my daughter, the person who would always be there, no matter what. But now I realized it was happening. Slowly, without fanfare, she was moving on, leaving me behind. The next day, Lily came over. She seemed distracted, as if she didn't know how to look me in the eyes anymore. I could sense that she was bracing for something, like she was about to deliver some kind of news she thought I couldn't handle. And I couldn't. Not at that moment. I couldn't bear the weight of her decision. "Mum, we need to talk," she said, her voice heavy, hesitant. My heart dropped. I knew what was coming. I had been preparing myself for it, but even then, I wasn't ready. The words that followed were a blur. Something about how she needed space, about how she couldn't take care of me anymore. She didn't say it outright, but I could hear it in the cracks of her voice. And then, just like that, she was gone. The woman from the nursing home came in a few days later, ready to finalize everything. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. This wasn't just a decision, it was a finality. A door closing forever. The day I moved into the nursing home was like any other, except it wasn't. The air felt thick, and the building, despite its neatness, gave off the feeling of a place where time had stopped. It smelled sterile, like the aftermath of a place that had seen too many endings. I couldn't help but feel like I was one of those endings, here to quietly fade into the background. I had been to nursing homes before, to visit friends and relatives, but it's different when you're the one in the bed, the one whose name is on the list. At first, I kept telling myself it was just temporary, that this was a pit stop, that Lily would come around, that everything would go back to the way it was before. But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, and nothing changed. The only sound that seemed to fill the halls was the clicking of the nurses' shoes, their soft chatter as they walked from room to room, and the occasional beep of machines. The world outside continued on without us, the elderly residents of the nursing home, forgotten and overlooked. I wasn't sure what I had expected from this place. I thought it would be a haven of comfort, a peaceful sanctuary where I could live out my remaining years in ease. I thought the staff would be kind and attentive, that there would be activities to keep me occupied, and that I'd feel like I was still part of something. But it was all just a far cry from that ideal. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It was deafening. The only people who spoke were the nurses and a few of the other residents, most of whom barely seemed aware of where they were. There were a few ladies who spent their days sitting in the lounge, knitting, talking about the weather, or discussing which soap operas they watched the previous night. But the conversations never went deep. It was all surface-level stuff, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was because they, too, were trying to avoid the painful truth, that we were all here because life had left us behind. There was one woman, Evelyn, who was a regular at the dining room table with me. She was sharp as a tack, despite her frail frame, and always had something biting to say about the food or the staff. I remember the first time I sat across from her. She gave me a once-over before leaning in close and whispering, "Don't get too comfortable here. These places are like quicksand. You think you'll get out, but they pull you under." Her words stuck with me. I wanted to laugh it off, tell her she was being dramatic, but deep down, I knew she was right. This place was a holding pen, a place where people like me, people who had outlived their usefulness, came to disappear. I spent my days staring out of the window in my room, watching the world go by. It wasn't a pretty view, just a parking lot and a row of trees, but there was something oddly comforting in the rhythm of life continuing outside. It was like the universe was reminding me that the world kept turning, whether I was part of it or not. On good days, I would take a walk down the hall to the small library and lose myself in a book. It was an escape. For a few hours, I could forget the sterile walls and the quiet despair that hung like a fog in the air. But even those moments were fleeting. There were other times when the weight of loneliness felt too heavy to bear. I would sit in my room and wonder if Lily ever thought about me. I wondered if she missed me, or if she was just relieved that I was no longer there to make demands on her time. I knew, deep down, that I had done what I could as a mother. But it didn't stop the ache in my chest, the emptiness, the feeling of being utterly invisible. I had written to her once, right after I moved in. I tried to keep it light, not wanting to burden her with guilt, though my words carried the unspoken plea for her to visit. I told her about the people I'd met, how the food wasn't as bad as I'd expected, how I was adjusting. I tried to sound upbeat, like I wasn't desperately hoping that she'd pick up the phone and call. But she didn't. Weeks passed. No calls, no letters, no visits. It was like I had ceased to exist in her world, like I was no longer her mother, just another old woman in a home that would eventually be forgotten by everyone, even by the ones who put us here. The staff, while kind enough, were overworked and often distant. There was no real warmth in the air, just a routine that each of us followed, day after day. I noticed that some of the other residents were far too content to accept this life, while others seemed to fight it in small, quiet ways. I wasn't sure what to make of it. How could I make peace with the fact that this was my future? I tried to focus on what I could control. I organized my room, unpacked my things, as though I were settling into a new home. I found a sense of comfort in the little things. The small vase of fresh flowers I kept on the windowsill, the new cardigan I bought myself, the handful of photographs I taped to the wall. They weren't much, but they were mine, my world, my life, even if it was shrinking every day. But the quiet despair lingered. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been abandoned, not just by my daughter, but by the world. Here I was, in a room I barely recognized as mine, trying to make a life out of nothing. It wasn't living, not really. It was surviving, just surviving. The days blurred together in that sterile place. And for a while, I found myself counting hours instead of moments, trying to make sense of my new life. But then, something unexpected happened. A spark of change, so subtle yet powerful I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday morning, a day like any other. I had just finished breakfast, cold oatmeal that tasted like paste, and was heading back to my room when I heard someone call my name. At first, I thought it was one of the nurses asking if I needed something, but when I turned, I saw her. It was an old friend from years ago, Marilyn, someone I had known from my younger days. Her face was older now, more lined, but her smile was still the same. I hadn't seen her in years, not since, well, not since everything changed with Lily. Marilyn had always been the adventurous type, the one who was always out doing something exciting, always encouraging me to join her. And for a time I had. We had gone on hikes, travelled to small towns, and even spent weekends at the lake. Those were the days when I still felt alive, like there was a world beyond motherhood, beyond the routines and demands of caring for a family. Marilyn had been there for me in ways I often forgot. But over time, like so many others, she faded out of my life. Now here she was, standing in the hallway of the nursing home, looking as if she had stepped out of a time machine. I froze, unsure of how to react. But then she saw me, and her face lit up with that same old warmth. "Diana, it's really you!" she exclaimed, rushing over and giving me a tight hug. I was taken aback. It felt good, too good, and for a moment I almost forgot where I was. The hug was a reminder of everything I had missed: human connection, friendship, a real bond. We sat together in the lounge, where I had spent so many long afternoons staring out the window at nothing in particular. Marilyn had come to visit a friend, she told me, but when she saw me, she couldn't help but come over and say hello. "I can't believe it's you," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I've been trying to find you for months. I had no idea you were here. Why didn't you let me know?" I felt my face flush. I hadn't even realized how much I had isolated myself until that moment. I had stopped reaching out, stopped looking for people to fill the empty spaces. I didn't want to bother anyone, especially not Marilyn. After all, what could I offer now that I had nothing left but time and memories? But Marilyn wasn't like that. She listened as I told her about my life here, about the other residents, the staff, and how I felt like a shadow of who I used to be. Her eyes softened as I spoke, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was complaining. I felt heard. "You know, you're not the only one going through this," she said gently. "There are so many people here who feel the same way. You can't be afraid to reach out, Diana. We can't just give up on each other." Her words struck me hard. I hadn't realized how much I'd been hiding, how much I had pulled away from the world. I had convinced myself that it was easier to be alone, that it was less painful than dealing with the reality of being forgotten. But Marilyn's visit made me see things differently. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe I still had time to reconnect with the people I had lost over the years. We talked for what felt like hours, sharing stories about the old days, catching up on the things that mattered to us. Marilyn told me about her children, how they had their own families now, and how she had retired. It felt like the world outside hadn't stopped moving, and for a while, I felt a part of it again. Her visit wasn't just a reminder of the past. It was a sign that I could still make connections, still find meaning in the little things. Before she left, she gave me a hug and promised to visit again soon. I could see in her eyes that she meant it. She wasn't just saying words to be kind. She genuinely cared. And somehow, that meant everything. As I returned to my room after Marilyn's visit, I felt something inside me shift. It was a tiny thing, just the smallest glimmer of hope, but it was enough to make me feel less invisible. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe, just maybe, the life I had once known wasn't completely gone. Maybe there was still room for new connections, even here. The next day, I sat by the window, but this time I didn't feel the same heaviness. The world outside seemed a little brighter, and I could almost hear the sounds of life again. Laughter, conversations, the hum of possibility. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt something stir within me. Maybe this nursing home wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was just the beginning of something new. It was a Friday morning when I first heard the news. The staff had gathered in the lounge for their usual meeting, but today, something was different. There was a buzz in the air, a quiet excitement. I overheard snippets of conversation as I passed by the open door, just out of earshot. "Did you hear?" one of the nurses whispered. "They're featuring a resident in the magazine." I couldn't help it. My curiosity got the better of me, and I slipped into the room, trying not to attract attention. One of the nurses noticed me standing there and smiled, nodding as though she had expected me to show up. "Good morning, Diana. You won't believe it. We've got a bit of excitement today. They're doing a story on one of the residents. It's about a woman who's had an incredible life, and they want to feature her in the next edition of the local magazine. It's pretty impressive." I blinked, confused. A story about a resident? I was hardly the type of person who would catch the attention of a magazine. I had spent so many months here, invisible to the world, barely a blip on anyone's radar. Who could possibly be interested in someone like me? "Well, who is it?" I asked, even though part of me didn't really want to know. The nurse looked around, making sure no one else was listening. She leaned in closer. "Actually, Diana," she said, her voice lowered, "the magazine is featuring you." I felt my heart stop. For a moment, I didn't know how to react. My mind raced, trying to process her words. Me? How could they possibly want to feature me? What had I done? What was there to say about my life that could possibly interest anyone? "You're joking," I managed to say, my voice shaky. "I think you've got the wrong person." But the nurse shook her head, her face serious. "No joke, Diana. They've been following your story for a while now. They were impressed by your resilience, your strength in the face of everything you've been through. They want to write about your journey, how you've made it through this chapter in your life and come out stronger." My head spun. Resilience? Strength? What had I done to deserve such a description? I was just a woman who had been abandoned by her daughter and left to fade away in a nursing home. There was nothing remarkable about me, nothing worth writing about. But then I remembered something, a small moment that had happened not long before. One of the staff had come to me and asked about my past, about my life before I came to the nursing home. I had shared a few stories, mostly about Lily when she was younger, about the things I had done as a mother, the challenges I'd faced, the quiet victories of a life well lived. But that wasn't something special. It was just my life. Was that enough to be considered newsworthy? I couldn't help but feel a surge of disbelief mixed with pride. Someone, people, actually cared about my story. Someone saw something in me worth sharing. It was a strange feeling, like waking up from a long sleep, blinking against the light, unsure if I had dreamt the entire thing. But the nurse was serious, and she wasn't the type to joke about something like this. "You'll be interviewed soon, Diana," she added, her eyes shining with excitement. "They want to meet with you, to hear your story firsthand." I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. On one hand, I felt honored, flattered even, that anyone would take the time to recognize my life in such a way. But on the other hand, I was terrified. What if they found out I was just a regular woman, nothing extraordinary about me? What if I wasn't what they thought I was? What if they discovered that there was nothing left of the woman I once was? The nurse left me to process the news, and I stood there for a moment, taking in what had just been said. My mind raced with the possibilities. A magazine? Me? On the cover? It didn't make sense. I was just an ordinary mother who had been left behind by the one person who should have loved me the most. But as the initial shock began to wear off, a small part of me started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Perhaps this was my chance to tell my story, to share the journey I had been on, to remind the world that even in the twilight of our lives, there was still value. There was still purpose. I had spent so much time here, in this nursing home, feeling forgotten, invisible. But this was a chance to remind myself that I still mattered, that my life had been meaningful, that I had survived, even when the world seemed to move on without me. As I returned to my room, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in months, I felt seen. For the first time, I felt that I had something to give again. I wasn't ready to let go of my story just yet. Not now. Not when the world was finally starting to listen. As I sat in the small, dimly lit room that had become my world, I couldn't help but reflect on the years that had led me here. The magazine feature was still fresh in my mind, and while it gave me a sense of unexpected validation, there was another lingering thought. Lily. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since she had placed me in this nursing home. It was a simple decision for her, I suppose. The burden of caring for a mother who had grown older, slower, more frail, was something she couldn't, or perhaps didn't want to, shoulder anymore. I had tried to understand, told myself it was for the best, that I didn't want to be a burden. But deep down, it felt like abandonment. I had spent so many years raising her, watching her grow from a bright-eyed little girl to a young woman full of dreams. There had been challenges, of course. Teenage years were difficult, with their sharp edges and rebellious streaks. I had done my best to guide her, to teach her right from wrong, to make sure she understood that life wasn't always easy, but that didn't mean we should give up on each other. I remember the first time I noticed the distance between us. It was when she came home for Christmas after her first semester at college. She wasn't the same girl who left. She was distant, closed off, as if she had outgrown me in the few short months she'd been away. I didn't know how to handle it. I was proud of her, of course, but it hurt to see her pulling away. I didn't know if it was because of the pressures of school or something deeper, but I could feel the gap widening. The years that followed seemed to be a slow erosion of what we had. Her calls became less frequent. She spent more time with friends, more time at work, less time with me. I tried to hold on, tried to fill the empty spaces with small gestures of love, sending care packages, calling her to check in. But it didn't seem to matter. The more I tried, the more distant she became. And one day, it became too much for her. She didn't have the time or the will to keep up the facade. It was then that she told me, matter-of-factly, that she couldn't care for me anymore. She had her own life, her own family, her own responsibilities. It was an impossible conversation to have, and even harder to accept. I tried to speak, to reason with her, to tell her how much I needed her. But my words felt like they were lost in the air. The decision had already been made. But what happened to my daughter? Where did she go? Was it just a matter of growing up, of finding her own life? Or was there something more? I couldn't help but wonder if there was a part of her that resented me. I had always tried to do my best, to be the kind of mother she needed. But maybe, somewhere along the way, I had failed her. I had pushed her too hard, expected too much, and in the process, I had lost her. As I lay in bed that night, trying to sleep in the quiet of the nursing home, I wondered what Lily was doing now. Was she thinking of me? Was she happy? Did she regret her decision? I would never know the answers to those questions, and that was the hardest part. The not knowing. The feeling of being left in the dark about the person I had loved more than anyone else in the world. I could only hope that, one day, she would realize that I wasn't asking for much. All I wanted was her love, her time, her presence. But now, that seemed like a distant dream, something I could never reach again. The days that followed the announcement about the magazine feature were a blur of preparation. The interview was scheduled for the following week, and I found myself both excited and terrified. It was a strange feeling, being recognized for something you never thought anyone would care about. The staff at the nursing home seemed to think it was a big deal, and I suppose it was. After all, how often did anyone here get the chance to be in a magazine? But with the excitement came a gnawing sense of doubt. What if I wasn't good enough? What if the story they wrote wasn't the one I wanted to tell? I wasn't some glamorous figure with an extraordinary life. Just a mother, a daughter, a woman who had lived through the highs and lows of ordinary existence. Was that worth celebrating? As I prepared for the interview, I found myself reflecting on what I could say, what story I could share. The nurse had asked me to talk about resilience, about how I had managed to live through the challenges of aging and abandonment. But I wasn't sure I felt resilient. I felt tired, worn out, and uncertain of who I was anymore. It was hard to put those feelings into words when all I wanted was to be seen for something other than my age or my past. But as the journalist arrived, young, bright-eyed, with a professional camera crew in tow, I felt a shift. There was something about the way they looked at me, the way they asked questions that went beyond the surface, that made me realize they were genuinely interested. They didn't see just an old woman in a nursing home. They saw a story, a life worth telling. The interview itself was a blur, a series of questions that I answered as best as I could. I talked about my childhood, my marriage, the ups and downs of raising Lily, the hopes I had for her, and the painful reality of our relationship now. I tried to explain how it felt to be left behind, to be forgotten by the one person who should have been there, but I struggled to find the right words. The pain was still too raw. But through it all, I felt a strange sense of pride, too. They were interested in me. Not in my age, not in my fragility, but in my story. And for the first time in a long while, I realized that maybe my life did have value. Maybe I had something to offer after all. When the interview was over, they told me they'd be back in a few weeks to photograph me for the feature. It felt surreal, like something out of a dream. Me, photographed for a magazine? It was almost too much to comprehend. As I sat back in my chair, reflecting on the experience, a thought occurred to me. For all my fears, for all my doubts, this moment was a reminder that even in the twilight of our lives, we can still be recognized. We can still matter. Maybe it wasn't about fame or glory. Maybe it was simply about being seen, being heard, and for once, I felt that. It had been months since I had heard from Lily. No calls, no letters, no visits. I had come to the painful conclusion that she had truly moved on. Her life, her family, her responsibilities. Everything had moved forward without me. And I had settled into a kind of numb acceptance of that. I couldn't keep chasing after something that wasn't coming back. I couldn't keep waiting for her to realize the hurt she had caused me. So I focused on the things I could control, the small victories of getting through each day, the moments of connection with the people around me, and yes, the magazine feature that had given me a glimmer of hope. But then, one day, as I sat in the lounge with Evelyn, sipping my tea and reading the latest issue of the nursing home newsletter, the door to the lounge opened. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, and I glanced up, half expecting it to be one of the staff or a resident coming in to join us. But when I saw her, I froze. Lily. She was standing in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room as if unsure whether she belonged. She looked older, more worn than I remembered, her face drawn and tired. But her eyes, those familiar, once vibrant eyes, were still the same. She was looking at me now, her gaze hesitant, like she wasn't sure what to say, what to do. For a moment, neither of us moved. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, relief, confusion. I wanted to run to her, to throw my arms around her and tell her that everything would be okay. But I couldn't. I was frozen in place, unsure of how to react. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she took a step forward. "Mum," she said, her voice trembling. I stood up, suddenly overwhelmed by 1,000 emotions. All at once, memories of her childhood rushed back, her first steps, her first words, her sweet laughter, the moments we shared. And now, here she was, standing in front of me, the woman who had left me behind, the woman who had once been my whole world. I didn't know what to say either. I didn't know how to explain the way I had felt, how much I had missed her, how much her absence had hurt. But I found myself saying the one thing that came to mind. "Why?" I whispered, the word barely escaping my lips. She paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Mum. I know I've hurt you. I've been so selfish." so caught up in my own life that I didn't realize how much I was leaving behind. She reached for my hand, her touch tentative at first, but then it became firmer, as if she was reassuring herself that I was real, that I was still here. I was scared, Mum, she continued. I thought I was too young to take on that kind of responsibility. I thought I had to live my own life, that I couldn't be everything for you. And I was wrong. I should have been there. I should have done better. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't want to cry. I didn't want her to think that I was still holding on to that pain, still living in the past. But the truth was, I was. I was holding on to everything. Every disappointment, every feeling of abandonment. It was hard to let go of that. I don't know if I can forgive you right now, Lily, I said, my voice breaking. But I do know that I'm glad you're here. I don't know what this means for us, but I'm glad you came. She nodded, and I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, the same kind of hope I had once had when I believed that everything would work out, that we would always be there for each other. It was a fragile hope, but it was there. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that maybe this was the beginning of something new. Not a perfect reconciliation, not a return to the past, but a chance to rebuild, a chance to move forward, to find a way to be mother and daughter again. Lily came back to see me every week after that first visit, and with each passing week, we began to find our way back to each other. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect. There were moments of silence, moments where the weight of everything we hadn't said hung between us, thick and suffocating. But there were also small breakthroughs. One afternoon, as I sat in the lounge, looking out the window at the rain tapping softly against the glass, Lily sat next to me. She had brought with her a photo album from her home, a thick, worn book filled with pictures of her childhood. I couldn't help but smile as she flipped through the pages, showing me pictures I hadn't seen in years. Pictures of her first day of school, her birthday parties, family vacations. I was such a brat back then, she said with a laugh, pointing to a picture of herself covered in chocolate cake after her 4th birthday. But you always loved me, didn't you? I nodded, my heart swelling with emotion. I still do, Lily. I always will. We sat there in silence for a while, the connection between us growing stronger as the hours passed. It wasn't that we were talking more, it was that we were understanding more. There were no grand declarations, no promises that everything would be okay. But there was a quiet understanding, a silent acknowledgement that we were both trying, that we were both learning to navigate the new space between us. At one point, Lily looked at me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Regret, yes, but also a sense of determination. Mom, she said softly, her voice hesitant. I know I can't make up for what I've done, but I want to try. I want to be here for you, for whatever you need. I don't know if I'll ever be able to undo the past, but I can start now. I can be the daughter you deserve. I didn't know how to respond to that. I wanted to say that it was okay, that I had forgiven her, but the truth was, I wasn't sure yet. There was still pain, still a wall between us. But I could feel the sincerity in her words, and for the first time in a long while, I believed in the possibility of healing. We'll take it one day at a time, I said, my voice steady. That's all we can do. And so we did, one day at a time, one conversation at a time. Slowly, we began to rebuild what we had lost, not in a rush, not with expectations, but with small, steady steps forward. The road wasn't easy, but we had found our way back to each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The weeks after Lily's return were a blur of mixed emotions. The visits were steady, and the conversation started to flow more naturally, but each interaction brought with it a tension, an undercurrent of unresolved feelings that we both pretended not to notice. There was this elephant in the room that neither of us could seem to address. We spoke in surface level terms about her work, her family, the weather, but we never spoke about the years of silence, the hurt, the abandonment. I could feel it building inside me, a pressure, a yearning for clarity. I knew what Lily wanted. She wanted me to forgive her. She wanted us to pick up where we left off, as though all the years of distance and neglect could be erased with a simple apology. But I wasn't sure if that was possible. I wasn't sure I could forgive her so easily. It wasn't that I didn't want to, it was that the hurt ran so deep that it felt like a wound that hadn't healed. How could I move forward when the past was still so fresh, so painful? One day, as we sat in the common room of the nursing home, I watched Lily as she talked about her family. She was excited to tell me about her children, how they had started school, how they had taken to reading, how one of them was learning to play the piano. I tried to listen, to be happy for her, but all I could think about was how long I had been left out of her life. I had missed all of this, the milestones, the laughter, the small, everyday moments that parents should be a part of. It wasn't just the abandonment that hurt. It was the feeling of being erased, forgotten, as if I never mattered. She had her own family now, her own life to live, and where did that leave me? The years had already slipped away, and I didn't know if there was enough time left to rebuild what had been lost. That night, as I sat alone in my room, I had a moment of clarity. I could keep holding on to the past, to the anger and the disappointment. But what would that accomplish? It would only hurt me. It would only keep me trapped in a cycle of bitterness. I had to decide. Was I going to forgive her? Or was I going to let her go once and for all? The decision wasn't easy. I had to confront all the feelings I had buried for so long, the pain of being left behind, the frustration of not being enough, the sorrow of seeing my daughter move on without me. But then, I thought of all the years we had spent together, the love we had shared, the good memories we had made. Could I really throw all of that away? Was my pride, my pain, worth more than the possibility of healing? I knew the answer, even before I said it out loud to myself. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose how to move forward. I could choose to forgive. The next time Lily came to visit, I took a deep breath. My heart was heavy, but I was ready. As she sat down beside me, I reached out for her hand, just like I had done so many years ago when she was a child. "I don't know if I can forget," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "But I want to try. I want to heal. And I want us to move forward. I can't change the past, but I don't want to live in it anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a sense of relief wash over her face. It wasn't the happy, carefree look of the past, but it was something real, something honest. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Mom," she whispered, "but I am so grateful that you're willing to try." And so, we took that first step together. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation, but it was a beginning, a choice to heal, to rebuild, and to move beyond the pain. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't a perfect peace, and it certainly wasn't the end of the road, but it was a start. The process of reconnecting with Lily wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't fast. There were setbacks, moments when we both stumbled, when the past threatened to rear its ugly head again. But for the first time, I felt like I was participating in the process of healing. I wasn't just waiting for her to come back and make everything better. I was an active part of this journey too. It wasn't always smooth. There were still silences between us, those awkward pauses when neither of us knew quite what to say, when the weight of everything unspoken felt too heavy. But those moments became fewer and fewer as time went on. We started talking about the small things, about my favorite books, her favorite childhood memories, about her own children. Slowly but surely, we began to find a rhythm, a new way of being together. One afternoon, Lily surprised me. She came into the nursing home with a small box in her hand, something wrapped up in tissue paper. I couldn't imagine what it could be, but when she handed it to me, my heart caught in my throat. It was a photo album. Not just any album, but one that was filled with pictures of us. Pictures from when Lily was a little girl, from her high school graduation, from the family vacations we had taken. There were pictures of moments I had long since forgotten, moments I thought I'd lost. But there they were, preserved in this album she had put together for me. "I thought you might like this," she said, her voice soft. "I've been going through some old things, and I found all these photos. I thought we could look at them together." We sat there, side by side, as we flipped through the pages. She told me stories I had forgotten, shared memories I had long since let slip away. It was a simple thing, but in that moment, I realized how much I had missed, how much we had missed. And as we looked at the pictures, as we laughed and talked, I understood something I hadn't before. Reconnecting wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it. It was about acknowledging the mistakes, the pain, and then choosing to move forward together, slowly, with patience, on her terms, and on mine. Lily wasn't the same person she had been when she left me, and neither was I. But somehow, that made our connection even stronger. We were both different, both more fragile, but also more resilient. And that, I realized, was the beauty of starting over, of finding each other again. Not because we were perfect, but because we were willing to try. It's strange how life works sometimes. You spend years searching for meaning, looking for connections, for answers to the questions that weigh on you. But then there comes a moment, a realization, that you can't wait for the world to give you those answers. Sometimes you have to take the first step, even when you don't know where it will lead. When Lily and I began to rebuild our relationship, I wasn't sure what I expected. I didn't expect perfection. I didn't expect us to pick up exactly where we left off. What I hoped for, what I wanted, was a chance to understand one another again, to be together, even if it meant doing so in a new way. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about finding peace in it. It was about acknowledging the hurt, the loss, and realizing that even with all of that, we could still move forward. As the weeks passed, I found that I had stopped counting the days here. It wasn't as though I had given up hope on the future, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just a woman waiting to fade away anymore. I wasn't just an abandoned mother in a nursing home. I was someone with a story to tell, someone who still had a place in the world. I began to make the most of my time here, connecting more deeply with the other residents, offering my support and listening ear. I had stories of my own, yes, but I also realized I had the capacity to listen, to help others who were struggling with their own feelings of isolation. I had become more involved with the activities around the nursing home, participating in group exercises, art projects, and even helping out with some of the new residents who were adjusting to their own new realities. In a way, it felt as though I had been given a second chance. Not in the way I had imagined it, no, not with grand adventures or a reversal of the years, but in the sense that I had been allowed to reimagine my life. I was more than just my age, more than my past mistakes. I was a person, a woman with a voice, with a history, and with the ability to shape my own future, no matter how small it may seem. And, just as I was beginning to settle into this new chapter, something surprising happened. I received a letter from the magazine. The article about my story was finished, and they were preparing to print it. They invited me to a small gathering at the publications office to celebrate the release. I almost couldn't believe it. This was happening. My story, my life, was being shared with others. I wasn't sure what to expect from the event. But when I walked into that office, surrounded by strangers, I realized something important. This wasn't just about the article. It wasn't about being on the cover or being featured in the magazine. It was about the recognition that even in the quietest corners of life, we all have a story worth telling. We all matter, no matter our age, our mistakes, or our regrets. I stood there, in that office, feeling a sense of accomplishment, not because of the recognition, but because I had learned to accept myself for who I was. I had found peace in my story, in my journey. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all. A few weeks after the magazine release, Lily came to visit again. This time, she came bearing more than just her usual offerings of homemade cookies or stories about her kids. She brought with her something that I had longed for, a genuine apology. It wasn't just a simple, "I'm sorry." It was an apology wrapped in years of regret and understanding. She sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap, and took a deep breath before speaking. "I've thought a lot about everything we've been through, Mum," she began, her voice filled with emotion. "I've thought about how I failed you, about how I let you down when you needed me most. And I want to say that I am so sorry. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. I'm sorry for abandoning you, for not being there when you needed me, and for not understanding the weight of it all. I can never take that back, but I want you to know that I regret it. I wish I could have been a better daughter to you." Tears filled my eyes as I listened to her words. They were what I had always needed to hear, but they were also what I had been too afraid to ask for. For so long, I had carried the weight of our broken relationship, hoping that one day she would realize the hurt she had caused. But hearing her say it, that she understood, that she regretted the pain, was a weight lifted off my shoulders. "I forgive you, Lily," I said softly, my voice trembling. "I'm not sure if I'll ever forget, but I forgive you. I've spent so many years holding on to that hurt, and it's time I let it go. We can't change the past, but we can move forward, together." Her face softened, and for the first time in so long, I saw the daughter I had always hoped to have. The woman who was now strong enough to face the truth of her mistakes, and the woman who, despite it all, wanted to make amends. "I'll do better, Mum. I promise," she said, her voice thick with emotion. And for the first time in years, I truly believed her. It wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about growth, about learning to let go of the past and step into a future where we could rebuild our bond, slowly but surely. As I sit here now, looking out the window of my room at the nursing home, I can't help but reflect on everything that has happened. The pain, the heartache, the loneliness, and the healing that has come with it. I've learned a lot over the years, especially in these past few months. I've learned that life doesn't always turn out the way we expect, but that doesn't mean it's over. I've learned that it's never too late to find peace. It's never too late to reconnect with the people you love, even if it takes years. And it's never too late to forgive, not just others, but yourself as well. I've also learned that life isn't just about the big moments, the grand gestures, or the recognition. It's about the quiet ones, the small steps, the soft conversations, the moments of grace. It's about finding strength, not in being perfect, but in being real. My relationship with Lily will never be the same. We can't go back to the way things were, and we shouldn't try. What we have now is something different, something new. It's fragile, yes, but it's also stronger than I ever thought it could be. I'm no longer just a woman in a nursing home. I'm a mother, a daughter, a woman who has lived, loved, and learned. I have my story, my truth, and no one can take that away from me. I'm still here, and that, in itself, is something worth celebrating.